So with that, I'd like to introduce Chris McLeod. Chris has been an advocate for cystic fibrosis care in Canada. He's a graduate of the University of Saskatchewan School of Law. He's a founding partner of Cambridge LLP, which is a corporate litigation firm. He is also the chair of the Canadian Cystic Fibrosis Treatment Society. He has written a book, Beating the Odds, which talks about his experiences with cystic fibrosis and also his advocacy for cystic fibrosis, people with cystic fibrosis in Canada. Before we start, I just want to remind everybody to put questions and answers or questions into the chat or into the question and answer section, and we'll address those at the end of Chris's talk. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really an honor and a pleasure, and I'm thrilled to be here. I found it interesting when you were doing a slide presentation. Most of the slides started in 89, 90, 91. I know in Canada, the first adult cystic fibrosis clinic was created, St. Mike's Hospital, in 1993, I believe. Previously, of course, a lot of people weren't making it to adulthood because it was a childhood disease, and back in the early days, typically it was terminal. A little bit of my story in context. I was born in 1969. Life expectancy in 1969 for people with cystic fibrosis, at least in Canada, was 4 years of age. Now, in Canada, we were lucky because in those early years, any medication that became available for the treatment of CF was generally made available. So the life expectancy went from 4 to 6 to 8 to 12 to 14. In law school, grading is done by the curve. So my life story with CF has somewhat been like riding the curve. I'm always just sort of a year ahead of where the life expectancy's been. So I've been very fortunate in that regard. I think it's now in the 50s, and I'm now 52 this year. So I'm carrying on my track record of riding the curve. Generally, I was in and out of hospital, but I had two real health crises, one in first year law school, where I ended up for several weeks due to some bleeding in the lung, and it was I ultimately got out and was able to start practicing law. But that was one point of challenge. But the last and the almost became a deadly moment was in 2012. I was 42 years old at the time, and my lung function had fallen below 30%, 27, 28. In Canada, once you're under 30%, they start looking at a lung transplant. So I was in St. Mike's Hospital in 2012 for about 4 months. And they were using every intravenous antibiotic known to humanity. Fast drip, slow drip, nothing was working. I just couldn't get above 30%. I was on 4 liters of oxygen a minute. And one day my doctor, Dr. Tullis, comes in and says, Chris, good news and bad. At this point, I'd been in for literally weeks. And I said, moratorium on bad news, good news only. She said, you have a rarer form of CF, the Delta 551 gene. There's a company in the States, Vertex, they have a drug. It's just being approved by the FDA. And it normalizes, we think, this defect. I said, that's amazing. Trouble is, it's expensive and it's not allowed in Canada. It'll be a while, but your situation is so severe, you might not make it through the flu season without a lung transplant. They're looking at the pre-transplant list. They said the company will give it to you on compassionate grounds. Well, then there was a huge fight because the Canadian government wouldn't let it into the country on compassionate grounds for a variety of reasons that were bureaucratic. We had a huge fight. We ultimately got it in. Well, within 10 days, my lung function went from just under 30% to just under 60%. That's FEV1, the forced vital airflow in 1 second. And I was walked off oxygen back to work full time. And the rest is kind of history. It then started a started advocating because I realized what a challenge the Canadian healthcare system is in terms of letting innovative new meds in. So just in the past few weeks, we finally have now secured Trikafta in every province. I won't get into the advocacy piece, but I think what I will talk about today, and I'm happy to answer questions from anyone about anything, whether it's advocacy or my lessons to survive these health crises when they occur. So while I was in that period of 2012, a doctor came into my room one day, resident, and he said, "Chris, I'd like to talk to you about something." I said, "No, talk to me right now." We wanted to book in a time later in the day. I said, "No, you got to tell me right now. I can't sit here wondering what you want to talk about." He laughed and he said, "Well, you seem to have a unique approach to your situation. Can you tell me what your your lessons would be?" And so I laughed and I jotted them down. 11 lessons to get through a crisis in health. And I just sort of sat there. That was 2012. Well, pan to this past year, and I'm not a doctor, but my layman's view of COVID is it's eerily similar to CF. It affects the lungs. Uh, Respirology and respirologists are involved. Everyone now has to be 6 feet apart and wear a mask. Well, CF people for at least 15 or 20 years have had to wear masks, and you have to stay 6 feet apart. In the adult CF clinic, there's one washroom for a particularly bad bug that can affect CF people. And so we've kind of lived in that world for a while, and everyone's now really concerned, obviously, and they should be. So I said, well, gee, I might have something to offer. I'll pen my 11 lessons to how to approach these health challenges when they come. So, and I think everyone, if you don't have a copy now, I know the clinic, we made them available. So I'll go through my 11 lessons. The first one is attitude is everything. It sounds cliche, but a cliche is just a great statement used too often. You need to be grateful for what you have. And believe me, even in a hospital, you can find amazing things to be grateful for. The fact that you're up in the day and you can look out the window and see the sun if you're blessed to have a room with a window. Every day I'd write down 3 things I was grateful for in that 4-month period when I was in the hospital. And it really does work, and it matters. Lesson 2, be the CEO of your own health, Chief Executive Officer. Does not matter if you're unemployed, underemployed, you're a student, what you do in life. When you're in a healthcare crisis, it's your health. The buck stops with you ultimately. You have to lead the team. The team is physicians, physio, respirologists, nurses, porters, you name it. I know at St. Mike's, when I was through that hospital stay, I wanted to go and send everyone a thank you note. And actually, I gave them a copy of the book because they were many of the anecdotes I talk about, they were part of. 62 people were involved in my care. And I'm sure that's very similar wherever the hospital setting is. Now, I went and included everyone from x-ray technician, the phlebotomist who takes blood, respirology, porters, cleaning staff, administrative staff, 62 people. It's quite incredible. The organization, the effort that goes into care. Well, that's your team. You are now the chief executive officer, and you have to lead. So you need to learn leadership skills, help rally the troops, let everyone know that you're still in the game. Lesson 3, power in your response. You can't control what happens to you. You have absolutely no control over that. But you have complete control over your response to and how you handle that situation. You have to have your response needs to be bold, daring, positive. And I go through examples of, in my own life, how to respond in those situations where you're getting blood. You can't control what the result of blood work is. Or the pulmonary function test. Pulmonary function test has been the bane of my existence for 52 years. I can't stand the test. I don't know why. I get competitive and right now I'm about 52% FEV1. My goal is still 60. I'm sure I'll get back up there. Live in day-tight compartments. That's my 4th lesson. if you start worrying about the future, you start worrying about the past, and it's natural, we all do and will, uh, it'll break you. You really need to focus on living in day-tight compartments. I worked on this because when I was admitted at last critical one in 2012, I had payroll. That had to go through every 2 weeks. I had rent for my own place. That just because you're in a hospital, those expenses and bills don't stop. Your responsibilities don't stop either. So you have to really live in day-tight compartments. Focus on today and what can I do today? Dream big and write it down. Now, when I was talking about in the context of my healthcare situation, there's a whiteboard in every room, at least at St. Mike's, and they write the name of the nurse and the doctor, treating physician on the whiteboard. So I erased that, and I'll show you from the picture of the book. I'm not sure you'll be able to see it, but I wrote on my whiteboard 165/65%. Never ever give up. Now, 165 was 165 pounds because I had in 2012 never been weighed 165. My maximum weight had been 160. And of course, 65% was my high water goal of getting my lung function back up to 65%, FEV1. I still haven't got up to 65, but I still, continue to try. And my weight now is just under 180. I'm about 176. So I've managed to beat the one goal, but dream big and write it down. You've got to let the world know what your goals are. And for me in 2012, 65% were mammoth objectives. Remember, at the time I wrote 65%, I was just under 30% lung function and had no idea there was a gene modulator therapy that was just coming onto the market. The grace of God, the timing, really worked to my advantage because I was able to be ultimately the first person in Canada on a gene modulator, Kaleido, at that time. Get up, dress up, show up. This is my 6th lesson I put in the book. And, it sounds simple, but this may be the most important one of all. You're in a hospital bed. There's only so many places you can go because of the IV antibiotics. Well, get up, dress up, show up. Every morning I would get up at 6 a.m., make my bed, get dressed, wash in the sink or the shower down the hall. It sends a message to everyone around you that you're still in the game, even if you have nowhere to go. And even if you're so sick, you have to cut back and lie in bed after you've gotten up. At least you're dressed and you're telling everyone you're in the game of life. So I would make a point of making sure I was up and at it for every shift change. So in St. Mike's, it was 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. So it was doable. And that sent a message to myself more than to everyone that I was still active and involved. In my case, back in 2012, I would walk across the street so you can unplug the IV. You're not on IV all the time. Usually 6-hour, 3-hour intervals. I would put a heplock and I would walk across. It was very challenging because I was on 4 liters of oxygen a minute. It was more like a shuffle. But I get across the street, have a cup of coffee, write down my goals for the day. They may be very simple goals at the time. Get back, and now I'm blessed because I'm a lawyer. I was able to do work from the hospital. I could do much of it lying down. A lot of it was on the phone. Obviously, I had to adjourn trials and motions, but that was my get up, dress up, and show up. The next lesson, the power of prayer. I'm a firm believer, whatever your faith may be, and I give some examples in the book, praying for yourself and others praying for you. Both are effective and they're powerful. Give you a quick anecdote. By the way, my mom's joined us today. She's in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So this power of prayer story relates to her. I mentioned that Dr. Tullis came into my room. It was 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, September 22nd, 2012, to tell me the news that there was this medication treatment. And the rest of that is history. But the Sunday before, so Sunday, September 21st, my mom phones me from Saskatchewan. I was in Toronto. And she says, "Oh my gosh, Chris, I've got an incredible feeling. I am certain something is going to happen positively this week." Now, we had no idea about any of the medication. I said, "Mom, I hope you're right." She goes, "Chris, I'm praying for you. Everyone is praying for you. They're coming up and they're telling me we're praying for Chris." Well, the next morning, sure enough, Dr. Tullis comes into the room. Now, everyone may say, "Well, geez, Chris, Vertex was on this for years prior to that." But in my world, in that moment, there was the power of prayer, and I ultimately received at least the news the next morning. The power of smiling and laughing. Lesson number 8. Honestly, when you're in a hospital, there is rich material for a Seinfeld episode. Someday I'm going to have to call Jerry Seinfeld and give him some great material to use. And it's particularly funny when you have a roommate. So obviously CF patients can't be in the same room, but because in 2012 I was there for so long, and there was only so much you could do, I was in a double occupancy room on the respiratory unit, and they would have, usually it was patients would come in for 3 days. They'd have a pulmonary procedure of some sort, not CF related. They would be my roommate. Well, I won't get into all the funny stories, but there were a lot of them. And it's great material, and it also makes you feel good. Smile and laugh. It's the one thing that doesn't take a lot of effort and energy, and it does make your day a heck of a lot brighter. Lesson 9, and again, it sounds trite, but it's true. Never give up. Even in those dark days where it went on for weeks on end in the hospital, and we were getting closer and closer to a lung transplant, never give up, ever. It's non-optional. It's the one thing you can do. Let the clock count you out, not your will. So I really lived by it. It was on the whiteboard with my 165-65. Never, ever give up. Lesson 10, the expression never better. It's a nice, tight, sharp, crisp way when someone says to you, "How are you feeling today?" I always pause and I say, "Never better." It sends a message to the person you're talking to that you're bringing your best effort to that moment. You're always looking at things it's all about perspective, regardless of what's happening to me. And I get it from my dear friend, Dennis Mills. I always tried to have a positive attitude, but I never found a way. I would say, "How are you doing?" "Well, I'm excellent. I'm great." Dennis, who was a member of Parliament in Canada, just a terrific individual. I ran into him, and we've become since great friends. So, "Mr. Mills, how are you?" He looked at me, paused, and he says, "Never better." And it resonated with me. So I go through, and Dennis had a whole philosophy behind never better. So I really adopted it. And of course, the last and ultimate lesson is choose to live your life always. And by the attitude and the perspective you bring to each day. And so those are my 11 lessons. Then I tell the story and a little bit more behind each one through people I've met who have CF. For example, attitude is everything. Well, 2 individuals who had phenomenal attitudes that I learned a lot from have since passed. Courtney Boyle, young boy at the age of 8, died. Now, this would be in the early 1980s. I learned more from Courtney than I have from pretty much anyone on attitude. So while he passed far too young, he was 8, he brought phenomenal attitude to the game. There's the old saying, you die twice. Once when you actually pass away, the second time when the last person who knows you passes away. So I always try and keep Courtney's story alive because he really illustrated attitude is everything. And the other gentleman, and there's many, but these are 2, his name was Ron Moore, and he was a hero of mine. I met him when I was 18, and he, I think, was in his early 30s. He ran a bike store in Edmonton, and he ran the Penticton Ironman. To put that in context, he has CF. That is a 6-mile swim, a 180-mile bike race, followed by a 26-mile marathon. To be healthy and run it, it's incredible. He ran it twice, and the last time I believe he did it in sub 12 hours. Ultimately, he passed away far too early, too young. I believe he was in his 40s. And I, quite frankly, don't know what he passed away from. I hope and pray it wasn't CF, but in any event, we've lost him. But he's another person who brought incredible attitude and resilience to everything he did. I learned a lot from him as well. So those are the lessons that I really try to live my life by. Another interesting story, and I'll just flip to the book. I don't know if everyone has it, but you soon will. Here's a picture of me. This is in 4 liters of oxygen a minute, less than 30% lung function, St. Mike's Hospital. Well, pan now to 2021. Now, by the way, with these gene modulators, they're not a cure. They are a great tool to in our challenges in fighting with CF. I always say it changes everything and nothing. I still take my enzymes every day. I take Casein 3 times a day. I take Pulmozyme, lung clearance, and occasionally a hospital stay. But these hospital stays now are not death sentences, right? You go in for 2 or 3 weeks because you need IV antibiotics. So we're in COVID, so I go into the hospital and it's lockdown. When you get into your room, no one's allowed in, no one's allowed out. For the restrictions, only your treating team, and they're basically in a hazmat suit. They've got their masks, etc. Well, the day my book was finally finished and they'd sent it to me for the final edit, I was in the same room as I was in 2012. It was only the second time since 2012 I'd been in the hospital. So May 2021, I'm sitting in that chair, except now I'm not on 4 liters of oxygen. My lung function was just under 50%, which is why I was going in. We're trying to keep it at 50. And I realize, oh my gosh, I've written this book on these 11 lessons and back in the hospital, but I'm in pretty good shape. They said, Chris, the editor, we need a picture for the back of the book. I said, well, that's not going to be possible because no one's allowed in or out of the room. So we'll just have to forego a shot of the room. He says, no, just take your selfie with your iPhone. So I do. So at the back of the book, there's a picture of me sitting in that chair. The book was done, so I couldn't tell this story, but I find it ironic. Looking very, I think, quite healthy, not on oxygen. You can actually see the whiteboard from the hospital room. But that picture on the back is the very same seat, chair, room as 2012. So it's a real turn of events from 2012 to 2021. And now with Zoom hearings, where the court, I'll tell you, legal systems changed dramatically. Now I can do a trial. I've got a 3-week trial coming up. I'm going to do it entirely from Zoom. So when I was in May, I had 2 signs on the outside of the door. Meeting in progress, because I was on a Zoom call in a meeting, or court in progress. And we ran everything from the hospital room very effectively, actually. It's fun. I'd be having an IV changed while I was on a call. But I implemented the 11 lessons once again in 2021, May, and because of the COVID lockdown. One essential ingredient whenever you go in for a hospital stay, certainly for the adults, fresh coffee. Hospital coffee is terrible at St. Mike's and any hospital I've been in about 5 as an inpatient. Bring Bodum, a kettle, grinder, and coffee beans, so that every morning you can get to the sink, boil the water, and have a fresh cup of coffee. And I always bring a ceramic cup. It makes life a lot better. So those are my 11 lessons. And the other piece that sort of come out of that was the advocacy piece. I think maybe I'll just take 2 minutes to let you a little bit of a window into how it works in Canada. We have incredible challenges trying to publicly access gene modifiers or any medication that would be considered costly. And we've got multiple layers. The federal government, because we're a federal state like you are in the United States, the federal government determines what drugs can enter the country or would be considered efficacious and effective. They're then given a drug information number. But the provinces determine what drugs are funded on the public formulary. And they have a complex and a convoluted system to do that. When I got out of the hospital in 2012. And by the way, I have private insurance through my firm. So I'm blessed. We've made sure that every drug that has a DIN number is listed on our private insurance formulary. So I thought, well, I better call the uh, then Assistant Deputy Minister of Health in the provincial government and let her know about this incredible medication that I was on and tell them to list it on the formulary. Well, it wasn't that simple. I called and they said, well, we don't talk to individuals. So I said, okay. So I set up the CF Treatment Society that afternoon. Got my mom's on the board, a couple of friends of mine, and I write back and I said, okay, so we can have a meeting now. I'm now the national chair of the Canadian Cystic Fibrosis Treatment Society. So I set it up just for the purpose of trying to secure a meeting originally and making sure that in the fight I had to get special access, if anybody else needed it, I would be able to lend letters and calls of support from an organization. Well, we then went on to what's been a 9-year fight to secure first access to Kalydeco. That took 2 years of hard fighting. Then Orkambi, which only was listed in Canada in 2021 on the public formulary. And then in tandem with Orkambi, Trikafta is now listed. But it was an incredible battle that took all the CF community, patients, their family, their friends, allies. So hats off to everyone who worked on that struggle. And we had lots of support from people in the States and around the world who were cheering from the sidelines. So before Trikafta was listed in Canada, we had over 160 people on compassionate use from the company, similar to what I was on before my Kalydeco was listed. As you know, it covers 90%, but ironically, I don't have a 508 gene. I have a 551 gene, and everyone on Kalydeco is now being switched over to Trikafta in Canada if you've got a 508 gene type. But I'm this anomalous crowd. There's about 150 of us who would be eligible for Trikafta, but we need our gene mutation to be approved. So I might have been the first on Kalydeco. I'm now going to be the last on Trikafta. So I'm calling it Club 150. 150 of us, the remnant that needs to secure access. So that's the next, and I'm hoping, final fight. Just as a matter of history, I think I said the first adult CF clinic in Canada was in the early 90s. But the biggest revolution in treatment in my lifetime was pancreatic enzymes. Now we take like 4 or 5 pills, but when from 69 to probably it was the early 80s, we were taking 30, 40, 50 enzymes a meal, which was a meal in itself, and they were terrible tasting. When we created Creon and enzymes was historically, just so everyone, if you weren't around in the 70s and 80s, that was a tectonic shift. And of course, now the gene modulators. But rather than keep talking, does anyone have any questions, whether it's on the advocacy piece or on we advocate with whether it's insurance companies, hospitals, or pharmaceuticals, or government, the payers, to list whenever someone needs meds. So I'm happy to talk about that, or experiences like dozens of funny anecdotes or other points from the lessons. So thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure chatting. I hope some of this was helpful.
So, Chris, thank you. That was just fabulous. Please put some questions into the Q&A. I think you really do need to change this to 12 lessons, because I really like the coffee idea. That, having a good cup of coffee might be, way up in the top 5, in my opinion.
No, it will say plenary position is the first, and it goes without saying.
I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about, advocating for yourself. I think that people get overwhelmed by being in the medical system, and oftentimes find it challenging to say, this is what I need and this is what's going to work best for me. How do you approach that? What advice would you give for people?
That's a great point and question. And believe me, even though I have all these lessons and I was trying to live by it, I fell into the trap of becoming dependent and what I call institutionalized when you're in the hospital. It's so easy to just let everyone do everything. First of all, in hospitals, you're not even allowed to walk down the hall for an x-ray by yourself, at least in Canada. And I get it for liability reasons. You don't want patients wandering around the hospital, getting lost, tripping and falling. So literally, you want a glass of water or juice, you have to press a button and someone will bring it to you. Well, after a few days, you will become institutionalized. And I use that as a mindset, right? You just become dependent. You need to stop advocating for yourself, even on the most basic. And the lessons, in large part, get up, dress up, be the CEO of your own health, were meant to combat that because I saw it happen so often over the years. Dear friends of mine, back in the day, we used to always hang out with each other, CF patients. We even had, we used to go to the hospital every day, and this would be in the early 90s, up to about 94, and we'd have physio. We'd all be lying bed by bed, and the tilting models, and the physios would all come in. It was between 1 and 2, and we'd do physio, and I'd go back to school. This was a small town in Saskatoon. We also had CF camps, where we'd all go in the summer, and we'd go canoeing up in the mountains together. And it was basically, we used it as a fat farm because they would feed us breakfast, lunch, supper, snacks. Everyone's trying to gain weight. um, and I saw so many people that go into the hospital and it would just wear them down, which is why I was always so, it really baked into my brain. You've got to challenge that system. So that's where be the chief executive officer of your own health comes. And even though I'm a lawyer, I'm very politically engaged. When Dr. Tullis came and said, Chris, we're trying to get it through the government program, I sat there for 5 days waiting for the result. I said it was supposed to be a 24-hour turnaround. The government denied it, but they didn't tell us. There's just no answer. So I kept saying, Dr. Tullis was getting sick of me. Her office is on the ward, and I was there at 6 a.m. and 11 p.m., and I was calling everyone. And then I thought, well, why am I calling Dr. Tullis? I need to start advocating for myself. So I call him. By then, we had about 42 former premiers. I'll put it in American terms: governors, congressmen, senators, very politically engaged people. 42 that applied pressure to the Prime Minister's office, who finally intervened on a bad bureaucratic decision to deny special access, which is entry of a drug without a DIN, drug information number, a non-approved drug into Canada. And when you want a non-approved drug for urgent, it has to be for an urgent need. You're about to die, unless you might get this drug, and there's no alternative medicine, and it's for a short period of time. We failed the short period of time test because the government said, well, you're going to be on this forever. And what if this company, Vertex, decides they're going to take you off it? Who's going to be responsible? We're not going to let that situation come because we might be responsible, the government said. Well, that's a bad legal decision. It's also a bad bureaucratic one. So finally, we figured that out. But that took me saying, okay, I've got to advocate for myself. And I was on the phone. This is actually part of the comedy routine, was me sitting in my boxer shorts. I'm on 4 liters of oxygen a minute. Luckily, with the internet and cell phone technology, and I had a roommate. So my roommate was sitting there with a constant flow of people. But you do need to break that institutional mindset, get on the phone and advocate in whatever way possible. And it was when the nurse came in and said, geez, Chris, this is the first time in 10 days I've not seen you on the telephone. Because I was calling everyone under the sun, as was everyone else. And but it was nice. It was an easy ask because there was no cost to the government. We were simply asking for entry of a medication the company was willing to provide. So, I mean, I had a great story to tell, too, in that advocacy piece. But I think I've gone way off the question, which was...
Well, I was asking about advocacy with your healthcare team. How do you...
That's another
you know,
great one. So,
how do you take control of your own care
okay,
or help control that with the
perfect.
group?
So I'm big on reverse the care process. So I treat it as a team. First of all, never let the doctor or medical team see you lying down. get out of bed, stand up in pre-COVID times, shake everyone's hand. We were a teaching hospital at St. Mike's, so I would have teams of people coming in, and I always volunteered if they wanted to. The first year med students, uh, what's this person's condition? So I was always talking to but you've got to call team meetings, every decision, and get results. People are coming and taking your blood 5, 10 times a day. Nobody ever tells you what the test is for. So always say, what are we doing? Uh, and I said to everyone, I will sign off on every decision. One decision, Dr. Tullis was a little frustrated with me, but I refused to get a PICC line, which now I've actually had one in the 2021, but I did it because I didn't want to give in. I thought it was too much of a permanent, and it was a bad decision on my part, but I still own it. I have pretty good veins. So even those 4 months, I had no PICC line. It was just switching the site thank goodness I have good veins, but every 4 or 6 days until it went interstitial. But that went on for 4 months. And Tullis said to me one day, Dr. Tullis, Chris, is this really a hill you want to die on? Like, why are you making such a big deal of this PICC line? I said, I know, but it's all that matters is it makes things more efficient. But it was one way of trying to take back a little bit of control psychologically for me. I advocate everyone, by the way, to get a PICC line. When I finally did get one, I've got an inordinate discomfort with needles. And whatever reason, it was a bad call. But CEO of your own health, you own it, you wear it. It was my decision. Now I will always get a PICC line. I can't believe I didn't do it for those 4 months. But
As my mother always said, think of it as a learning experience.
Well, listen, no one has made poorer choices over the array of many things than Chris McLeod. And I learned by experience, not by being taught.
So speaking of mothers, and one of the things I think our pediatric patients or parents of pediatric patients would be interested in is, what did you think about transition? What was helpful for you as you thought about moving to the adult world out of the pediatric world and taking control of your own health care? It's a while ago now, but
no. Frankly, I mean, I always try to relegate it to the sidelines, and have so much else going on. CF is really just a distraction. You're still mindful of it, you're attentive to it, but really don't let it be a preoccupation. And so on the transition, it was really not much thought in it because it's just a different doctor. And, obviously in the pediatric unit, there's toys and it's a very friendly, playful. No, I don't know how it works in States, but we're up until the time you're 18, you would be in the pediatric wing. And then over 18, you're in the adult wing. And they always transition. So I remember it's a little nerve wracking because you're going into it's almost like a business room, right? You go into a doctor's office. At least I did. It was, sitting, the doctor's behind the desk. He's wearing a tie. I don't know that many people who wear ties at the time. So but I really didn't think too much of it at the time. And I still try to make CF as minimal and small a piece of what I do and think about. And so it was just a shift to a different person. The nurse coordinator we have the same nurse coordinator in the pediatric and the adult clinics, at least in Saskatoon we did. So it was that, and in our case it was Shirley Patola, who was a saint. So it really makes the transition, in my case, easy because Shirley was the constant. I really would call her for everything rather than the doctor. And but I think in terms of transitioning in anything in life, I always say, and I really firmly believe this, make CF a footnote. And no matter how much time it preoccupies, you got to do physio, clearance, and all the other pieces. I mean, I'm on inhaled antibiotics 3 times a day, 365 days a year, plus Pulmozyme, despite being on Kalydeco. Kalydeco or Trikafta really just gives you a new lease on life, a tool in that medical kit that lets you stay in the game of life. But you still have to deal with all the other treatment aspects.
So how do you, you sound like you're very, excuse me, very good with your therapies, very adherent to your therapies. How do you do that? How do you keep
Well,
that mindset?
yeah, no, I slipped, believe me. The though I mean, with Casetin, it's really good because it only takes about 3 minutes to inhale. A Pulmozyme's a little longer, and I do the Pulmozyme before I exercise. So Pulmozyme, exercise, clearance, Casetin, and I'm really blessed and fortunate. I have my own business, so I just walk into the main area of the office, and I'm doing my inhalations, uh, or I'll just walk into the boardroom, and it does. I really am fortunate because everybody knows, and I'm very open about it. Okay, I've got to take my medication, and so if you're depending on your workplace, it does make a difference, I'm sure.
That brings up another thought.
Yeah.
As you say, you're very open about CF.
Oh
Is that something that you tell people about early on when you
no,
meet
I
them,
never
or
raise.
how do you address that with work and relationships and whatever?
Great point. I never raise it. If somebody asks, I'll mention it. It's like having a mole. You don't walk in and say, "Oh, I've got a mole." Now, pre-Kaleido, once I went on Kaleido, I had a lot of people say to me, "Geez, Chris, this is the first time I've been in a meeting with you where you haven't coughed like at least 25 times." And I said, "Oh, it's because of this medication." And then they said, "Oh, okay." I tell them, "Oh, you've got CF." Most people say, "Oh, geez, I didn't even know that." Most people spend 90% of the time people spend thinking about themselves, not in a bad way, but that's just the way the world works, right? And so yeah, I will only mention it. Now, it's pretty evident if I'm standing there doing inhalation, someone's going to say, "Well, what is that for?" I say, "That's just a lung condition. I've got to take some inhaled medication." If they ask what it is, I'll say it's CF. If someone says, "Geez, Chris, you're out of breath, or you're coughing, or you look like death warmed over, you better go lie down," then I'll say, "Yeah." And if they ask, I'll say, "Oh, it's CF, health condition. What's CF?" But it's on you got to kind of pry it out of me. Not because I'm trying to keep it quiet, but I got too many other things to do. It takes too much time to talk about. There's too many other things to talk about, but more than happy to chat. Obviously, I've been very public in my advocacy piece with the government fighting for that. So, and it's part of it. You got to tell the story. So now, of course, in Canada, everyone says, "Well, Chris, you're an anomaly. We can't use your example." But listen, it's the only story I've got. So that's the one I have to share on the advocacy piece.
No, I think that's tremendously important, and there's a huge advocacy push here in the United States for trying to get equal access to medication and care, and a whole number of things, as we're discovering in
Yeah.
disparities of various aspects of care. So it is definitely a challenge, and one that I think we all need to rally towards. Are there any final questions or comments for Chris from the group? Well, Chris, this has really been wonderful. Thank you. Um, it is a remarkable story that you tell, and um, the idea that you can advocate for yourself, and some of these rules, although you talk about them for CF, work for other things as well. I was thinking
Yeah.
about the one, especially the one about you can't control things that happen to you, but how you respond to them is certainly well within your control.
Yeah, it's so true. By the way, one of the books I really lean to and I quote a lot is from Marcus Aurelius, Meditations.
Mhm.
And the NFL has really adopted the Stoics. A guy by the name of Ryan Halliday wrote a book that the NFL and a lot of professional athletes refer to. And so, one of my introduction in the book, I say, when you have a healthcare crisis, it's like going to Super Bowl and you've never played football before in your life, but the stakes are that high.
Yeah.
And so you really need to rise to the occasion and control your response because you got these. Dr. Tullis, by the way, my doctor, wrote the foreword for the book. And I say her foreword sums up the whole book. If you just read the foreword by Dr. Tullis, you kind of get the essence of it. But she's St. Mike's Hospital, we call it Canada's Urban Angel. It's really a phenomenal facility. And I want to thank everyone for having me and also for the medical team at Johns Hopkins. Uh, I'm so blessed from my experience, and I'm sure that all your patients have the same feeling. When I found out it was 62 people that were participating in all aspects of my care, it's very humbling to know that people show up every day, often without not a much thanks. So the kindness, healthcare professionals, I'm really, really grateful for.
Well, thank you for sharing your experiences. We do have Chris's book. We're going to give them to people that registered when you come to clinic, if you're coming in the next few weeks. If not, then we'll be mailing them to you or getting them to you in some way, shape, or form, but probably before the end of the year. So Chris, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We're going to take a little break now. We'll be back at 10:15.